Those blue-green algae blooms, the pictures that you've seen where certain embayments look like chunky pea soup, that's outrageous. That shouldn't exist, and that means, that's an indicator of a gross failure.
This is a good bill, and I'm pleased to sign it.
Well, I think Americans would be stunned to learn that this policy, by the time we get to 2030, could cost as much as $1 trillion. Ethanol and the ethanol mandate was supposed to create a very large renewable source of energy that could replace oil, gas, fossil fuels, and help reduce greenhouse gases.
This country for a long time has been looking for energy independent solutions, and this was billed as one of them.
It was a win-win. It looked like good policy and good politics. I was involved in Vice President Gore's campaign, Senator Kerry's campaign for the presidency in 2000, 2004, and in both of those campaigns we were for the ethanol mandate, we were for ethanol. It looked like it was very popular in Iowa, so it was good politically, and it looked like it was really good for the environment. Instead, we now know that's all changed. It can raise the average family's food bill by $2,000 a year.
We talk a lot in our political rhetoric about trying to make things easier for the little guy, trying to make things easier for working families, trying to be in the business of helping those people. I don't see how a policy that is increasing a food bill annually is actually a sensible policy that marries up with that rhetoric.
In terms of its impact on the engines of cars and other vehicles, you get less power out of it than you do out of a regular gallon of gasoline, so you have to use more of it.
If you get too much ethanol in your fuel tank, it can do real engine damage.
If you want to stand up and fight for working families, if you want to protect the environment, if you want to take action against climate change, then you ought to oppose the ethanol mandate.
This is Lake Erie in October in 2011, and the water is totally green with algae.
Looks like we're actually driving through paint. I mean, it's so thick. That is a lot of algae.
The problem started coming back about 2000, 2002. It has accelerated, and the bloom that we saw in 2011 was 2.5 times worse than any of the blooms that we saw back in the 1960s and the 70s. We put nutrients into the lake in the summer when it's very warm, would be when you would expect to get blue-greens or cyanobacteria, and they are capable of producing toxins that can harm people, harm animals. We've had the harmful algal bloom issue on Lake Erie since the 1960s. When we solved the problem the first time, the primary source of nutrients was poor sewage treatment. So we solved the problem by greatly improving sewage treatment. Today, the primary source is agricultural runoff. Phosphorus and the nutrients in general are coming from fertilizers applied to the land or manure from an animal operation.
Corn, soybeans, and wheat are all users of phosphate, so we have to have it. If we would stop applying phosphate at all to our soils, it would be a real drag on our farm's ability to grow crops.
Beginning about 10 years ago, those algae blooms turned into potentially toxic blue-green algae blooms.
And those blue-green algae blooms can seed blue-green algae blooms, these toxic blooms, elsewhere throughout the lake. So if you get it in one spot, it can tend to spread.
Blue-green algae is a threat everywhere. Everybody's involved in this. Everybody's got to start paying attention.
Over the past few decades, beach closures have become a common event. The lake was included in a travel book titled "Don't Go There," and deaths of family dogs have been traced to the consumption of blue-green algae.
One beach closure is one beach closure too many. Once enough of us experience a beach closure, or our kids coming out with their skin irritated, or our dog dies because of eating blue-green algae, well then, more people will mobilize. And we live in a state that has this reputation for being an environmental leader. Why is there one dog dying?
The Bay Park, which is right over here behind us, used to average about 55,000 visitors per year, per summer season. And recently, in the past 5 to 6 years, it's averaged 5,000 visitors a year. So you can see what it was like and what it is like now.
You can literally, in a rainstorm, watch the manure next to the barn where it's spilled next to the spreader, go right into the ditch on the side of the road, and then get conveyed right into the local creek, 200 feet down the road, go right in the river, and then go right into the lake. You can literally pinpoint where those nutrients are entering the river, making it unswimmable throughout the summer.
The regulations regarding agriculture are clearly inadequate, and in addition, the model of agriculture here, of dairy farming here, is really inconsistent with a clean lake. The model is more cows, more corn, more debt. So every time they get into trouble, we're adding cows, we're adding corn, and we're putting more land into production.
There's obviously a lot of erosion that can occur from about this time of year in the fall when the corn crop is taken off and before new vegetation comes up in the spring. Soil is sitting completely exposed for upwards of 6 months, and we believe that to be one of the most significant sources of phosphorus from the ag setting.
In 2007, Congress passed an expanded Renewable Fuel Standard, or RFS, which mandates that large quantities of biofuel, made from corn and other biomass, be blended into the fuel supply each year. Lawmakers promised that this policy of turning food and plants into fuel would be a silver bullet for America's energy challenges, making us more energy secure and more environmentally friendly. Sounds too good to be true? Well, it is. 7 years later, the RFS has not only failed to achieve its stated objectives, it's also hurting every American at the grocery store and the gas station. Let's take a look at the quote-unquote success of the RFS so far. What does energy security look like under the RFS? Not much. Ethanol distorts energy markets, and the government's own Energy Information Administration projects that the U.S. will still rely on oil and natural gas products for more than half of its energy needs for decades to come. Ethanol could also increase fuel costs. Experts have said that RFS mandates are likely to increase ethanol prices by 18.8%. Raising the cost of gasoline, which is required to be blended with ethanol. In fact, fuel that is up to 85% ethanol is more expensive than pure gasoline, even with today's petroleum prices, and biodiesel costs more than $1.50 more per gallon to produce. Restricting Americans' access to affordable fuel is a strange approach to energy security, don't you think? Well, that's a shame, but at least we're lowering emissions, right? Wrong. In order to produce enough biofuel to power the more than 250 million registered vehicles in America, an unprecedented amount of land must be cultivated. Since 2005, we have more than doubled the amount of land for biofuels, currently using 8.5% of all U.S. farmland, a number that could double again in the next 10 years. So where are we getting this land from? The clearing of natural forests and grasslands to make room for corn. Researchers have found that this deforestation actually doubles greenhouse gas emissions over 30 years. So the RFS is not only failing to meet its intended goals, it's actually working against them. But the lunacy doesn't stop there. The RFS raises costs for every family in America. During the worst drought the United States has seen since 1956, the mandate diverts 40% of America's corn crop away from food and animal feed to ethanol production for fuel. Skyrocketing animal feed costs have put a strain on livestock farmers and pushed food prices higher and higher. Put simply, more ethanol means less food and higher prices. Since the RFS passed in 2005, the price of corn increased more than 200%. Cereal and bakery product prices have increased almost 77%. Meat, poultry, fish, and egg prices have increased 78%. Vegetable oil and fats like butter are up more than 444%. In short, breakfast just is not what it used to be. Neither is what you put in your gas tank. Beyond making gasoline more expensive, ethanol is also 33% less efficient than traditional gasoline. The lower fuel economy of ethanol gasoline blends means Americans will spend a lot more time and money at the pump. The renewable fuel standard has failed to meet its goals over 5 years. Instead, it's costing Americans money, hurting the environment, and failing to limit our dependence on foreign energy sources. So ask yourself a question. Why is this still the law of the land? Call on lawmakers to reform the failed renewable fuel standard and pledge your support for a smarter way forward, a smarter fuel future.